and welcome to Watercooler, the weekly testbed for smart ideas brought to you by the Menzies Research Centre. Tonight, the madness of COVID-19. We'll be crossing to London for an extended interview with author Douglas Murray to talk about postmodernist viruses running rampant on the intellectual left, infecting our universities, corporate boardrooms and much of the media. We'll be talking about the madness of identity politics, censorship on social media and the revolutionary spirit behind Black Lives Matter. We'll also be crossing to Tasmania to hear from Senator Claire Chandler, who's fighting an important battle for women, the right to participate in sport without the risk of being crash-tackled by a transgendered biological man. But first, let's deal with the madness of COVID-19 directly and the effects of the Victorian government's coercive lockdown that's just been extended. The Australian Financial Review's Jennifer Hewett has been writing sensitively and seriously about this since the beginning of the crisis, about the delicate balance between killing the virus and killing the economy. She joins me tonight from a hotel in Sydney. Jennifer, welcome to Watercooler.
Hello.
Jen, just before we get on to the substance of this interview, I know you've just flown in, or last night flew in from Victoria to New South Wales. Tell me what that's like, arriving at New South Wales from Victoria right now.
Well, that's right. I certainly felt like a refugee and perhaps a potential criminal when I arrived. People were incredibly nice with all the police, but there were an enormous number of police officers around. We went to the international terminal rather than the domestic terminal, and we had to wait in line, quite a lot, and fill in many forms, get repeatedly, have to give our proof of our identity, because of course if you're not a returning New South Wales resident, then you're just not allowed in. And all of that lasts for about an hour or so, and then you're put on a bus, no idea where you're going, and we turned up in the Sydney suburb at a perfectly nice hotel where there were many military Australian Defence Force people to escort you to your room, and of course I will be here now for 2 weeks without being able to open the door.
You have to pinch yourself, don't you? This is actually Australia. I mean, it sounds like exactly the experience I certainly had as a journalist travelling in communist countries, and you probably did too.
Yes, that's right. It did feel as if I was in either a very repressive society, or even a very kind of mild version of a war zone with all these uniformed figures around you escorting you at any time, and you knew that if you attempted to step out of line, there would be terrible consequences.
Now, Jennifer, you've been writing in the Fin Review multiple times a week. I'm always impressed by that, by the way. I struggle to do one column a week. But you've been writing since the start of this, more than 6 months ago, since the lockdown started, about the need to have a balanced response to make sure that the cure, if you like, is not worse than the disease. We haven't even begun to learn that lesson yet, have we? Certainly not in Victoria.
Well, certainly not in Victoria. I think that's always been reasonably front of mind, and of course increasingly so for the federal government, and that's why what's happened in Victoria is such a concern. Of course, it was all reasonably easy to try and balance the things, although with some difficulty, of course, in terms of getting the economy revived. But you saw when restrictions began to ease in most of the country, late May and June, the economy certainly wasn't anything like it had been before, but there were signs of life. Now, those signs of life have been pretty well extinguished in Victoria, as the government has decided that the only way to combat the virus was to have an incredibly protracted and very harsh lockdown. Of course, this was the state that had the harshest lockdown to start, but because of its own errors, it has meant that the whole of Victoria has been really just in a deep freeze for months. I think Victoria, without doubt, would have the longest and harshest shutdown of any country I can think of in the world.
Yeah, that's a point I think was made in the splash in your paper on Monday, that there's an Oxford Stringency Index, I think it's called, Stringency Index, which measures how tough these lockdowns, and Victoria seems to be top of the tree, and yet relatively small number of cases compared to, say, Europe America, just about anywhere else.
Yes, a very small number of cases, and of course, many of the infections, most of the infections are actually concentrated in the aged care area and also among hospital or health workers. But the rest of the economy is still being forced to just really undergo the most extreme conditions. And I think one of the issues this week was when it became apparent that the Victorian government had no plans for easing this off anytime soon. In fact, quite the reverse. It deepened and lengthened the length that most businesses and most people, of course, would be under the most, very, very tough restrictions. And this is what has sent, I think, the business community just spare the idea that there doesn't seem to be any attempt to balance the need to keep the economy alive while keeping people alive.
And look, we shouldn't pretend that's easy. I mean, the trade-off between public health and the economy has been very difficult from the start. But I think what troubled me, and you brought this up in your column on Monday, that certainly from Daniel Andrews' rhetoric, he doesn't seem to have even recognised that there needs to be a trade-off, yet let alone begun to wrestle with it.
No, I think his view is, you've absolutely got to get this, the health crisis under control, and basically the economy can just wait until that's done. Well, there are two problems with that, I think. One is, of course, many businesses cannot wait. I mean, a lot of retail, a lot of hospitality and accommodation cannot now open until there are zero cases, for 2 weeks, by the end of November. I mean, many of them will there's no possibility of them being able to survive that. But the other huge issue in Victoria is that unlike New South Wales, Victoria's contact tracing system has been notoriously terrible. I saw somebody, a federal official, comparing New South Wales and Victoria's systems to a Ferrari and a Trabant. And I think that is unfortunately true. And therefore, not only do you have these very, very, very tough thresholds to be met, which really are not being met anywhere in the world again, but you do not have any confidence in a system that can deliver it, because Victoria's contact tracing system, although it has definitely improved in the last few months, is still regarded as the worst in the country.
Some might say the reference to the Trabant is somewhat apt, given that was the legacy of communist East Germany, while the West was getting on and developing the BMW and the Audi. They came up with the Trabant. But there is this, let's not try and tread carefully here, but there is a kind of top-down socialist approach that comes from the Andrews government, which is not very helpful in these circumstances, I think.
Well, he dominates the government, clearly, and of course he has this habit of having a daily press conference, which he answers, which he says he answers every question. In fact, he takes questions, but he does not answer them. Often he says he'll get back to people and then never does. But I think more than that, it's the gap between his very, very tough rhetoric and the actual situation on the ground in terms of the efficiency and efficacy of the response, and nowhere, of course, more obvious than in the problems they have had with contact tracing. And that means really that if you've got cases in the community, it becomes so much harder to try and get a quick grip on that and to control those numbers and to send people into quarantine. This has been the issue from the beginning when cases were very low, and it remains the issue now, even when cases are, of course, are falling, into the around the 50s to 60s or even 40s relative to the hundreds. So the government's excuse, and Daniel Andrews' excuse, is that this is all because of the much higher numbers. Well, naturally that does complicate things, but this was a problem that was apparent from the beginning and is still apparent now.
Jenny, can you give us some insights from what you're picking up by talking to people in the business community, individual businesses, large and small? What's the picture you're getting of what's happening to our economy right now?
Well, in Victoria, it's just a shocking picture, and that, of course, has an effect on the rest of the economy. I think so. You almost have to kind of divide it into in two countries again. You know, there's Victoria and there's the rest. I mean, everyone else is having problems, of course, although the federal government's assistance has greatly helped reduce the impact of that on for many people's lives. But in Victoria, all businesses, I mean, they're under these stage 4 restrictions, they have just been shut down. And not only that, I think there's a real feeling that the Andrews government has very little interest in their welfare or in consultations. You saw this this week with the government saying, oh yes, of course we had extensive consultations with the business community, and the business community basically saying, you've got to be kidding, this was really just a bad joke. There was no real consultation. There were one-way discussions, often with quite junior officials who read from a list and said, you know, that was that and nothing more. So I do think that the economic cost of this is massive, and it has yet to be understood. And you had even, you know, normally very mild-mannered types like the head of Wesfarmers, Rob Scott, putting out a very, very angry statement on Sunday when the details of the Premier's so-called plan or roadmap to recovery became clear. And you had Innes Willix from the Australian Industry Group saying it was just a document of despair.
Yeah. I mean, you and I would have thought back in late March when all this, you know, the intense lockdowns began, we would have thought that by now we would have been well on our way to mapping out a program for recovery from this. But it seems to me, it's frustrating that we can't begin to do that, because until we stop hitting the economy with a hammer, you don't know what the damage is or, you know, what the task is ahead of you, do you?
Well, I think, interestingly, you know, by late May and June, there was far more confidence. Of course, there was a total exaggeration right at the beginning about the number of likely cases and deaths in Australia. And this did lead, but in fact, because we were able to greatly reduce the number of international travellers, was very effective in limiting the spread of the virus. The one big exception was, of course, Victoria. And so the optimism of late May and early June has now been completely hammered by what's happened in Victoria. And of course, that has a huge impact across the country. And that's one of the reasons why so many of the other states refuse to have open borders, for example. It's obviously really dented business confidence, and it has totally confused now the ability of the federal government to try and figure out what it's got to do. I mean, Josh Frydenberg's got a budget coming up on October 6th. And, you know, it's very obvious that they had not taken into account not only the impact of the Victorian shutdown, but the fact it would now continue so long in such a harsh way.
Well, Jennifer, what are you, day one of lockdown, day one of quarantine, having returned to New South Wales? I think that means you'll be able to concentrate on your columns fully. And
well, I guess there's not going to be much else to do.
Well, we look forward to more of your insights daily in the Australian Financial Review, which for my money... When
I finally do get out of quarantine, it'll be very interesting, I think, having not been in New South Wales for a couple of months, to see the difference between New South Wales and Victoria, and in particular the CBD area. Of course, Melbourne, not having the harbour and much else, you know, really prides itself on its vibrant CBD. And of course, it's now a ghost town. That will take years, if ever, to recover from.
Yeah, it's tragic. But look, I look forward in a fortnight's time to welcoming you out for possibly a drink on the pavement in the free world.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Jennifer. So from Jennifer Hewitt from the Australian Financial Review in quarantine in Sydney, let's cross to another quarantine if there's such an expression, in Hobart. Senator Claire Chandler, welcome to Watercooler.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Tell me, what did you do to deserve getting locked up in your home for a fortnight?
Well, we had our essential traveller status revoked by the State Controller in the week or so leading up to this last sitting fortnight. So previously we were able to come back to Tassie and go about our business after a sitting week, but now we're not so fortunate. We're subject to the same rules that all other Tasmanians are, insofar as we have to quarantine at home upon our return. So lots of Zoom meetings for me for the next couple of weeks.
But it's hard, isn't it? I mean, your normal day job, requires that you get out and talk to people. So it's not perfect.
It's not, but at the same time, in 2020, it's sort of become the new normal, and to an extent, we've got used to it, and a lot of constituents and stakeholders now are far happier to have you make a phone call or do a Zoom meeting. Obviously, nothing can replace face-to-face contact, and certainly that's been my experience. But yeah, it's not too bad. We're getting there.
Well, Claire, one of the great privileges of presenting this webcast for the Menzies Research Centre since the lockdown started is the opportunity to bring some of the great talents, the new talents in Parliament, to a wider audience beyond their state. So, in that capacity, I welcome you. You entered the Senate last year, I think, after the 2019 election, and you're part of a whole new cohort there, aren't you?
I am. There are quite a few of us new class of 2019 senators that all started around the same time, and it has been a very different experience to what I originally expected when I was pre-selected. 2 years ago today, I was pre-selected in the number 2 spot on the Tasmanian Senate ticket, and I certainly thought at that point that our prospects were not looking quite so fabulous electorally speaking, but as the PM said, we do believe in miracles, and it was amazing to come to Parliament in Canberra with a whole big new class of 2019 incoming parliamentarians. So there's a good sense of camaraderie around the group, I think. Yeah,
particularly in the Senate, I see there's not to downplay what's happening in the House, but in the Senate you've got some really new cohort. There's you, there's people of your age or around that age, which I think gives a great hope for the future of the party in Parliament.
I like to think so. Certainly myself and James Patterson, Amanda Stoker, John O'Duniam, Alex Antic, there's a good group of young ones coming up through, or younger ones coming up through. And I think it does say something really positive about the future of the Liberal Party, that we have got some younger parliamentarians coming in. Phil Thompson in the House of Representatives is another great example. Yeah, and from such a variety of backgrounds. Now, I think you and I first met, I think, when you were president of the Young Liberals, I think. Yes. And I think we were having a discussion then about, the imperative of getting more women into Parliament on our side, more diversity generally, I guess, but particularly women. We succeeded brilliantly, I think, with yourself included. The balance in the Senate now is much closer to where we'd like it to be, I think, on our side of Parliament. Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting thinking back to those conversations that we were having back in 2016 when, you're right, I was Federal Young Liberal President and leading the piece around how we could engage better with young women in the party. And one of the main impediments to that, as I saw it back in 2016, was that we didn't have, or in the lead up to 2016, we didn't have many younger women in the Parliament, and now we do, and I think that's great because it means that younger conservative thinking people have female role models to look up to. So I'm certainly trying to do everything I can to ensure that we get more women in the party generally, and more women excited about the prospect of running for Parliament, but particularly ensuring that our young women in the party feel looked after and listened to. Later on, we'll be talking to Douglas Murray, who wrote that brilliant book, The Madness of Crowds, and one of the themes which he explores in there is a whole transgender movement and just how far this has gone in a very short amount of time. You, I think, have been looking closely at how this impacts women's sport. Tell me about it. So when I first started as a senator just over 12 months ago, I was inundated with correspondence from men, women, mums, dads across the country who were all concerned about a set of guidelines that Sport Australia had developed around transgender inclusion in sport. And their main concern was the impact that in allowing biological men to play women's sport would have on women's sport as it pertained particularly to the safety of women and the ability of women to play on an even and fair playing field. So it sort of snowballed from there. I asked a couple of questions to Sport Australia at Estimates back in February, found out such shocking concepts that they haven't actually defined what the term woman means. I find that quite puzzling, that the peak sporting body in this country doesn't know what a woman is, particularly at a time when we're trying to encourage more women to get involved in sport. But then recently we've seen World Rugby as an international code develop some research that basically plays out the concerns that these Australians have been raising with me for the last 12 months, that there is a 20 to 30% greater likelihood that a woman will be injured on the rugby field if she's tackled by a biological man. So it's a very complex area of life and of law that we need to work out. But my position is that women's sport needs to be preserved for biological women so that they can play on an even playing field and they know that they're safe when they're playing.
Look, that makes enormous sense to me, and I'm sure, you know, the sort of good people who tune in to watch this interview. But it's still controversial, right? Did you fear in taking this stand that you were going to take some flack from, you know, the cancel culture brigade or whatever it is?
Honestly, I was so buoyed by the groundswell of support I received on social media, even on Twitter, which is quite shocking. I don't spend too much time on Twitter, but some of the comments were quite complimentary around my advocacy, and the emails and the letters I received from constituents right across the country that shared my concerns. So no, initially I wasn't too concerned about getting cancelled, so to speak, and I still don't consider myself to have been cancelled, but obviously given the speech that I gave to the Senate on Thursday night, I have found myself at the pointy end of a complaint by the Tasmanian Anti-Discrimination Commission, so we'll have to see how that plays out.
It's mad, isn't it, Claire? Absolute madness. I mean, it makes no sense to me, and yet you're essentially taking a stand on behalf of women here.
Absolutely. And the concern that I have about this more broadly, Nick, is that it is a women's rights issue, but it is also a free speech issue. I mean, we've seen time and time again in this country people being hauled before quasi-judicial processes for saying what they believe in. And in this instance, all of my advocacy has been based on fact, on the, like I said, referring back to those statistics that World Rugby has come up with, on the clear evidence that suggests there is a safety concern here and that there's also a fairness concern for women in sport. So it's a little bit troubling when you have a body of evidence behind you that supports your perspective and yet people are still getting dragged in front of tribunals for stating what is only described as 100% factual information.
Well, it's been good to talk to you. But before we let you go, though, just give us some insights into Tasmania. I think no active cases, I think, as we speak, could change in Tasmania right now. Does that mean you're allowed to pretty much, you know, do whatever you want, go to restaurants, all that kind of thing?
Yes, with the exception of the fact I'm currently sitting at home for the next few days. Yes, in Tasmania we are enjoying a level of freedom within the state. There have been a couple of, I think, justifiable grumbles within the community over the last few weeks, concerns about students not being able to dance at their formals at the end of the year, around, you know, when you can, the circumstances in which you can go to a bar or a pub and when you can drink or when you can stand and drink or where you can sit and eat food and drink. That there are, you know, as we've seen everywhere, there are rules that are sort of dictating our lives now in a way that we're not really accustomed to, and people understandably are coming to terms with what that means. Generally, I think business confidence is pretty good in Tasmania. Certainly when I was able to get around the state before we went back to Canberra in the last fortnight, the stories I was hearing from small business people were generally quite positive, but there's also a recognition now, I think, that our livelihood in the medium to longer term is contingent on those border restrictions relaxing at some point. And the Premier has named the 1st of December as the date for that, and I'll certainly be looking very closely to see if there's any possibility we can bring that back a little bit closer so our small businesses can properly get back up and running again and back to normal.
Let's hope so. First day of summer, just at the time of year when we're beginning to think it may be warm enough to go to Tasmania.
It's a beautiful season in Tasmania, so let's hope that 1st of December is the date.
Thank you. It is possible that some of you watching tonight have yet to read anything by the brilliant British author Douglas Murray. Possible but highly improbable, I'd suggest, since Murray's invaluable insights into the cultural and political madness of our time appear frequently in many publications that you and I respect. His book, The Strange Death of Europe, Immigration, Identity, Islam, spent almost 20 weeks on the Sunday Times bestseller list when it was published in 2017 and has been published in more than 20 languages. His latest work, The Madness of Crowds, Gender, Race and Identity, exposes the new ideology that forms the creed of the new modern left. It was the most important book I'd read in a decade, I felt last year when I read it when it first came out. Murray's insights into identity politics, online shaming, intersectionality, cancel culture, all those things of the modern woke world map out the dark terrain on which the battle of ideas is being fought. Douglas Murray joins us from London. Doug, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to Watercooler.
It's very good to be with you.
Douglas, you wrote in The Madness of Crowds last year, "We are going through a great crowd derangement. In public and in private, both online and off, people are behaving in ways that are increasingly irrational, feverish, herd-like, and simply unpleasant." In the light of everything that's happening now, you must have some grim feeling of vindication.
Sadly, they have, yes. Earlier this year, when the COVID crisis hit, I had a moment, as I'm sure a lot of us did, where I thought maybe the sort of craziest bits of identity politics and more are going to take a back seat. You know, maybe now we've all got some serious issues to worry about. Maybe unserious issues will bother us and detain us a little less. I thought, you know, now at the very least, even if we don't all get ill and die, you know, our living standards is going to decline and much more. And I thought, well, in that case, we'll all have real complaints and we won't have so much time for people with totally fraudulent and made up complaints. You know, in a time where actual aggression feels like it might be growing, microaggressions might take a back seat. And that was my view early on in the crisis, the COVID crisis. And then I just saw that whole thing blow right up. And in fact, what has been revealed in recent months is that what I describe in The Madness of Crowds seems to have just gone on steroids for the last 3 or 4 months. And it's both vindicating what I say in The Madness of Crowds and very worrying for me, because what I say in that book, as you know, is really in part a warning. It's an attempt to decontaminate an area of, or a lot of areas of thought that have been willfully contaminated by dishonest and disingenuous actors. And unfortunately, it seems that those dishonest and disingenuous actors in all of our countries have been having the time of their lives.
You describe the increasing speed with which this movement rolls on with ever greater absurdities. Things that were perfectly okay 5 minutes ago are suddenly hanging offences. The COVID-19 crisis seems to have accelerated the madness even more.
Yes, well, there is a, I wrote about this early on in the crisis, that I was very worried immediately by the way in which there seemed to be a policing of the boundaries, not just of discussion, but of investigation, that seemed to me very troubling. I was alarmed, for instance, that there were groups, including think tanks and investigatory bodies, who were saying, these are the things that should be looked into and these are the things that should not. There's a think tank that claims to study extremism in London, where I am, which immediately said that it is a conspiracy theory to claim that the virus may have come from a laboratory. And I was just shocked, amazed at the way in which so fast on such a huge issue, there was the attempt we've seen on lots of other issues, but the attempt on a sort of brand new issue to just box in what should be looked at and should be said and should be thought about. I am very, very opposed to that on this issue as on any other. I'm always for the widest possible discussion, because I always suspect that if you have the widest possible discussion, you've got the largest chance of getting to the truth. And that if you allow people to box things off and say, you can't say this, you can't think about that, you've got a disproportionate likelihood of unnecessarily hurtling yourself and your society into error. And I do think that's something that has been going on in this crisis, as in the ones I write about in the book.
I think if Martin Luther King was to make his famous "I Have a Dream" speech today, he'd probably be immediately cancelled on Facebook for posting incorrect thoughts. He famously said, of course, that people should not be judged by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. And now it appears the colour of your skin is all that matters.
We have indeed, I say, in The Madness of Crowds, it's taken half a century for Martin Luther King's disciples to completely invert his dream. We actually have figures like the deeply sinister, fraudulent, I think, figure, Robin DiAngelo, an American academic, who happens to be white, by the way, who, with her book, White Fragility, has actually gone around the country in America giving lectures saying that what matters most is the color of your skin, and that actually people who start talking about the content of character rather than skin color are, to use one of the terms of the jargon of the age, problematic. In exactly 50 years, we go from Martin Luther King to this crock fraud, Robin DiAngelo, hawking this idea that Robin DiAngelo is that Martin Luther King's totally wrong, and that what matters is skin color, not the content of character. And this is of course, this extraordinary perversity about this, because as I see it, and as I've tried to warn people, you either have Martin Luther King's dream, or you've got hell when it comes to race relations. And if I can explain that, one of the reasons for that isn't just philosophical, it isn't just moral. It is, and I try to warn people about it, it's deeply practical. I mean, in a country like my own, in Britain, let alone the United States, the white population is the majority. And I don't think that it is sustainable for a bullying, vociferous minority who happen to be black or white or any other color to go around telling majority populations that they are wicked and evil and have nothing good about themselves, and to do so in the name of anti-racism, and to say that some people are better than them because of the color of their skin. This is something which I have been deeply worried about seeing, and I saw it incidentally when I was in Australia summer before last. I did a tour around a number of Australian cities, and I noticed that there, as much as here, you have this idea, for instance, of certain things can be said by certain people by dint of their character traits or characteristics, and cannot be said by other people. This is what I describe in The Madness of Crowds as the problem of the speaker, not the speech, that we've become almost uninterested in what the content of somebody's speech is, like we've become less interested in the content of their character. It's all about who the speaker is. It's why people say speaking as a, and then, always give some trait they believe qualifies them to speak. And this is just a small example of something that Dr. King was saying, no, it would be the content of your words, just like it would be the content of your character that would matter. It shouldn't be necessary for people to stand up and say speaking as a in order to justify whether what they're about to say is of worth or not. And it's deeply, deeply mistaken as a long-term strategy, because, as I say, majority populations, I believe, will not tolerate being told basically shut up. And so I warn about this, but I feel like I warned about it without effect, because in the time since I first wrote this, people have just stampeded exactly down the dangerous, disastrous path that I'm trying to warn against.
Douglas, you see, as I do, a religious element in this movement. I hesitate to use the word religion because for me that devalues the positive religious faiths that are part of our community. But a sociologist would recognise many of the same functions in woke faith, if you like. It's a way of binding people together with a shared worldview and excluding the apostates.
Yes, yes. To that extent, by the way, I've come to the conclusion that it would be better described as a cult. I agree that Durkheimian, lens through which to understand it is probably a useful one. But by this stage, we're talking much more about cult-like behaviors than we are religious behaviors. The religious behaviors are not just the binding issues, but the fact that we have so many spillovers from organized religion that appear to be manifesting in these social justice movements. I'm thinking particularly of things like the desire to atone, the desire to alleviate guilt, the attempt to impose guilt and feelings of guilt on others. These are much more very recognizable, particularly recognizable from what one might call spilt Christianity, to use T.E. Hulme's famous description of romanticism. And this is really spilt Christianity we're dealing with in parts of the social justice movement. And you see that sometimes, by the way, completely openly. There were scenes in American streets in June, July, where white people were actually flogging themselves in the street. And black people were coming over and trying to stop them, saying, "We don't want this, brother. We don't want you to do this." And these white maniacs are like bleeding or welted on their backs. You think, wow. I mean, you can see that occasionally with Shia, religious festivals. But I thought I wouldn't expect that from like white Americans. But here we are with something, as I say, our societies really haven't seen since the Middle Ages. And so those sorts of things say, yes, there's an obviously religious type of spilt religion here. The reason I say it's actually cult-like is because the further the social justice thing goes along, the more you can see cult-like traits. For instance, the call to separate from your family if your family do not have the right views. Increasingly, your grandparents are racist, and if they do not get with the project, you must break off from your grandparents. I mean, by the way, these are wicked, wicked things to say. Wicked, wicked things to do to try to split up families like this. Can you imagine anything more upsetting for a grandparent than for their grandchild to come back from college and tell them, "You've got the wrong ideas, grandma, grandpa, and so we can't see you anymore"? I mean, it's really disgusting on a human level what's being taught at the moment. But these sorts of traits, the call for companies and others to pay tithes, give over a portion of your income to the approved group. This is cult-like behavior. We would recognize this in any other context, and I'm surprised it's taken us so long to recognize it with these people. But they should be called out for this by now.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's repentance without forgiveness, isn't it? I mean, there are many examples of people in your book who are hounded by the offence seekers on Twitter for incorrect thoughts, but no matter how much they grovel, they can never redeem themselves in the eyes of their accusers. I'm thinking, for instance, of that poor old Benedict Cumberbatch, who you mentioned in your book. He foolishly used the term coloured actors, if I remember correctly, when what he should have said, of course, was actors of colour.
Well, he had an advantage, because poor old Benedict, there were two things. By the way, I mean, the thing he was attacked for was just fantastically ludicrous, even by the standards of our highly ludicrous age. I mean, he referred to coloured people when that month's thing was people of colour in America. It was acceptable to say coloured people still in Britain. And by the way, the NAACP, the National Association for Coloured People in America, hasn't changed its name. So a different standard was being applied, not for the first time. depending on the speaker. But the other thing, of course, was that Benedict Cumberbatch did have an advantage, was that he had a big PR team around him, as all mega famous, mega rich Hollywood actors do. Most people aren't in that situation, and if they misspeak by saying something that this week you're not meant to say, even if the NAACP is still called the thing you're not meant to say, you most likely just find the whirlwind coming at you and you don't know what's hit you, and it's all over, and you haven't got a PR team, and by the time you scramble to get any help, you're totally unsalvageable. So yes, this is one of the most ridiculous trends of the age. And by the way, the one that can be pushed back at most, I've developed a serious lack of sympathy for prominent figures who complain about things they're not allowed to say, because I honestly think that our generation is the luckiest generation in history. Every single thing our forebears did before us contained far more risk than anything any of us have to face in our lives. All we have to do is speak, and speak the truth as we see it. And I'm just struck by the fact that the bullies, and it's just nothing more complex than that, the bullies in the social justice movement have persuaded adult after adult to shut up, not to speak, and it's pathetic. I don't think we have to go along with it. I don't see any reason why we do. We could be more organized, we could be cleverer, definitely, in avoiding certain traps, but there's no way that adults in positions of power, and indeed people without any position in our societies, should be this fearful of using language and of discussing ideas. And that's why I say in the Madness of Crowds, I say, I identify all these. We've got to be able to talk about LGBT, we've got to be able to talk about men and women, we've got to be able to talk about race, and we shouldn't have them feel like every time any of us in our private or professional lives goes onto any of these really interesting and important subjects, we are dealing with an imminent death scenario. It shouldn't be like that.
Talking about cancel culture, can you explain, Douglas, from your point of view in London, why Tony Abbott, our erstwhile former Prime Minister with great accomplishments to his name in the form of trade, in the field of trade, has become, a figure of hate for the British media? All sorts of horrible and untrue things have been said about him in the last couple of weeks. What on earth is going on?
It's just the craziest thing that's happened in the last few days. Can I give a quick example before this happened? We've been a weird culture war example of this for some time in the UK. We had it with my late friend Roger Scruton 18 months ago or so, when the government here tried to appoint him to an unpaid advisory position on building commissions in the UK. And this unpaid advisory position was highly controversial when he was put into it. And the left just came for him. And eventually they really tried to destroy him. And they called him all the names of the age. And fortunately, he was able to be, his career was saved. But they tried everything, they threw everything at him. And I mention that because something very similar happened with Tony Abbott. And by the way, I said something very similar to what I said about the Scruton example with the Abbott example. Last week, the very lazy British broadcast media finally get on to discovering Tony Abbott because there was this rumor that he was going to be involved in British trade negotiations. By the way, I should stress, I admire Tony Abbott enormously. I think he is a remarkable politician. I've seen him up close a number of times in Australia and elsewhere. He is, of course, anyone who's become a prime minister is by nature, this is, to achieve the absolutely top a rank in politics. And to think that such a person would be willing to help Britain in trade negotiations, being so experienced as he has been in Australia and so successful in Australia, is something that this country, my country, Britain, should take as an enormous compliment. It's something that I personally have stressed, I think we should feel very proud and grateful for. Grateful, remember that. Anyhow, of course, the broadcast media doesn't operate like that. It operates on a gotcha paradigm, and a very ignorant journalist from Sky News in Britain, which is very different from Sky Australia. Sky News in Britain has become a deeply sort of woke organization, a very, very unwatchable channel. It has a presenter called Kay Burley, who the other morning just started accusing Tony Abbott of being, and we could all sing the song in exactly the same order, so let's do it. He was accused of being a homophobe, of being a misogynist, of being wrongthink. I think he's of course a climate change denier. I don't think she said he was a transphobe, but I'm sure she was gearing up for it. And I watched this with just amazement at any journalist being able to embarrass themselves this much. But what was more worrying was that she was doing this to a British minister, in that case, the very weak Conservative Matt Hancock, who was just blustering his way in response. And instead of saying, you're defaming a great friend of this country and a great man, sort of said, he knows about trade and I don't know about the misogyny, homophobia and all these things. But I mean, obviously homophobia and misogyny is terrible and climate change now is terrible and, and this sort of thing. So these very weak Conservative politicians did that for a couple of days, and it sort of caught on. The Guardian, our main left-wing propaganda rag in the UK, that's not really sound very well. I should stress, by the way, the Spectator magazine outsells the Guardian now. I'm very pleased with that figure, by the way. So the failing Guardian, ran on its front page, questions over misogynist Abbott trade roll. By the way, eventually the British government did show that it had some balls and appointed Tony Abbott, quite rightly, to the post they wanted to. But there was clearly a sort of wobble at some point on Thursday or Friday. I made an intervention at The Spectator saying how preposterous this was, and saying, as I said with Scruton, by the way, that if you can't appoint Tony Abbott, you can't appoint anyone. If a former Prime Minister of our closest ally isn't appointable, then no one's appointable. Who do you think is gonna make the mark if Tony Abbott doesn't? And how low grade do you want to go? Do you want to find somebody who's never achieved anything in their life and never said anything and has a totally sort of a clean track record of exactly all of 2020's social beliefs, and has weirdly somebody who expressed 2020's social beliefs throughout their lives? These are preposterous demands, and of course, in the case of Tony Abbott, they were lies that were being spread about him. The broadcast media, particularly Kay Burley and Sky News, were just broadcasting lies about him. They didn't know anything about Tony Abbott. And here's the thing, and as I said in defence, not only is it the case that if you can't appoint Tony Abbott to such a role, you can't appoint anyone. Secondly, it's deeply ungrateful and dishonest of the British media to act in this way when somebody is doing Britain a favour and an honour to wish to serve and to help this country at a very important moment in our history. But thirdly, I don't give a damn anymore. I am fed up of it, like I think a lot of people. I was fed up of seeing my friend Roger Scruton gone over like this. I'm fed up of seeing Tony Abbott gone over like this. I don't care anymore. As I said, for all I care, Tony Abbott could be a fire-breathing Paisleyite on the issue of sodomy. He could have spent decades walking around with placards like Ian Paisley. I wouldn't care. He could still be the best trade ambassador. And particularly, I don't care when it's dishonest claims saying things like he once said something about women in the late 1990s that Julie Gillard then 12 years ago, in order to get herself out of a corner, claims means he doesn't like women. I don't believe this anymore, and we shouldn't believe it, and we shouldn't fall for it. But these are like the spell words of our time, and they chuck them out at everyone. They did it to Tony Abbott. Thank God it didn't work on this occasion. But they do it to everyone, and it's high time that more adults stood up against this and said, no, you don't get to use these rights claims as weapons to beat people with and win a war on dishonest terms. And I'm delighted this was resolved, but I am very angry still that it was possible for a Conservative government to wobble in the face of opposition like this. You know, we have an 80-seat Conservative majority in the UK, and sometimes you get the impression that we live under completely Labour Party control.
Doug, there's so many discussions arising from your book. We're clearly not going to get through them all, but let's just encourage people to read the second edition, which has just been published with the updates on COVID-19. But your mention of that fine journal, The Spectator, which of course has an Australian edition, reminds me that I recently got censored on Facebook for posting a piece pointing to a Spectator Australia article. I should confess that the piece was by my wife, incidentally, who'd written about the great medical research, including here in Australia, that's being invested in trying to find promising new ways to treat COVID-19 without a vaccine. What's so offensive about that?
That's very interesting. You're not the first victim of anti-spectator bias. Spectator phobia, one might call it. It's rife in the social media companies, this particular phobia. I occasionally have readers who write to me and say they've been banned from Facebook for a time or suspended for sharing an article of mine. It always makes me feel absolutely terrible, by the way, because, you know, I don't find myself, I feel like somebody who's sort of brought unhappiness into another home, you know, brought a problem into somebody else's life. But of course, it's not my fault, and it's not the reader's fault, just as like it isn't your fault and it's not your wife's fault. It's the fault of the social media companies. They have, and as you know, in the Madness of Crowds, I write a chapter on tech, because I spent a certain amount of time in Silicon Valley trying to work out what's been going on. Tech is doing a lot of things in our lives that we've underestimated. And one of the most striking is, of course, that at this stage, the tech companies are finding themselves doing something that I don't think they did anticipate. They should have anticipated, but I don't think they did anticipate, which is that they ended up having to be, in their view, a sort of censor, or they had to end up behaving like publishers behave, a decider of what is acceptable in their publication. Now, by the way, this is a basically impossible task if you're Facebook, because there's too much material. It's not like editing a magazine or a newspaper. Millions and millions of people are on the platform, and you just can't do it. I mean, I think it's a sort of fool's errand. And my own view is that the social media companies can make sure that illegal things do not go on. I.e., you can't put bomb making manuals on social media. But what they've done consistently is to go for everything a step below that and then a step below that. And there are several reasons for that, I should stress. The first is a very practical one. Silicon Valley is, and the people who are the sort of content checkers are almost unanimously, like everyone else in Silicon Valley, from the political left and the political far left. This isn't just anecdotal. This has been demonstrated. The Obama administration, when the Democrats lost in America, all those people who worked for Obama went to Silicon Valley. Same in the UK. Liberal Democrat leader Nick Clegg, former deputy prime minister, failed as a politician in the UK, immediately gets hoovered up by Facebook and becomes one of their chief, officers, and then brings in all of his failed third and fourth rate, low grade, ruddy Lib Dem MP and Lib Dem friends to come and work at Facebook. See, the people who want to decide what you and I and everyone else can know and say and read are all of the political left, without exception. There's even less right-wingery in Silicon Valley than there is in academia these days. And so these decisions are all made by the left. And what's more, they're ignorant. They're wildly ignorant. They're kids. I mean, this is one amazing thing. I sometimes think when you see censorship debates in Silicon Valley, I sometimes think these are people who've never read anything. They don't know that we've had all of these debates many times before in our history. We had them in England in the 17th century. We had them in England and elsewhere in the 19th and 18th centuries. We've had them in the 20th century repeatedly. Facebook and others behave as if we've never had these debates about censorship. And they have actually taken upon themselves the decision to, for instance, decide what people can or cannot say about COVID. That's how you get into this preposterous situation that you and your wife are in, where the oldest running magazine in the English language, The Spectator, can run a piece, but Facebook, a new, relatively new, I mean, a real, upstart by Spectator standards, upstart company of I don't know, what is it now, 20 years standing, thinks it can decide that the Spectator's content isn't reproducible. Well, to hell with these people. We need to cause a much bigger fuss about it. It's outrageous that they think they can limit the remits of the debate. They know, in my experience, far less than the average member of the public on these matters. They're so-called experts and no such thing. They desire to limit debate. They desire to have a power, and do have a power, which is deeply, deeply disturbing, because in my opinion, absolutely nobody at Facebook or any of these companies is remotely qualified to decide what you or I or anyone watching can know. Absolutely none of them. They're not qualified. They're not knowledgeable enough. They're not grown up enough. They're just out of short pants. And this has got to be a much, much bigger scandal, because these people have too much power, and it has to be taken away from them one way or the other.
Well, as you say, Douglas, to hell with a lot of them. Let's celebrate the positive things about modern technology, like the ability to have conversations with great people like you. And it's the next best thing to having you here. And let's hope we can start lifting these border restrictions soon and get you back.
It would be great to be back with you, I tell you.
Thanks very much for joining us.
It's a huge pleasure, and best to everyone there.